The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. The apostles rejoined Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. Then he said to them, "You must come away to some lonely place all by yourselves and rest for a while." For there were so many coming and going that the apostles had no time even to eat. So they went off in a boat to a lonely place where they could be by themselves. But people saw them going, and many could guess where. And from every town they all hurried to the place on foot and reached it before them. So as he stepped ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he took pity on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he set himself to teach them at some length. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Remember last week I said to you Jesus was a man with a plan, that he had this strategy, that he was thinking not one or two steps ahead, he was thinking multiple steps ahead. The plan is continuing today, because last week in our gospel what he did was he sent out the apostles. He sent out the 12. He sent them out to preach, to heal, and to deliver people who had all kinds of ailments. And he sent them out to the very mission that he himself was entrusted by the Father. And this is important to see. You know, many times you hear versions of Christianity where what you hear is only Jesus. What you hear about is only the ministry of Jesus. And they act as if this ministry of Jesus is so centered on him that nothing else really happens. Well, in Mark's gospel and the others, we have the ministry of the 12. In Luke, we also have the ministry of the 72. And it's important to see that there is a plan of moving the mission and the ministry from Jesus himself to ever wider circles of influence. Because ultimately, at the end of the gospel, he will tell them that what they are doing has to go out to the entire earth, to the entire world, go out into the whole of creation and proclaim the good news. So Jesus sends them out. Our text today says the apostles rejoined Jesus. He sends them out, so they went and did a whole pile of things. They don't tell us what they did, but what we do know is that now these 12 are rejoining Jesus. And they told him all they had done and taught. Well, you could imagine how much energy they had there. Eh? Because I think these guys themselves would be shocked at what they themselves were doing. Now, they had witnessed Jesus doing it. Jesus had taught them, he had commissioned them, he had sent them out. But I think to their own shock and amazement, what was starting to take place, they themselves were just in shock and awe, and they couldn't believe what was happening in front of their own eyes. And we see that going on. And because Jesus said to them, "You must come away to some lonely place all by yourselves and rest for a while." They must rest for a while. They must have a Sabbath. They must have a Sabbath. And this is an important piece, you know. Sometimes we start to feel that when we are doing important things, that there is no time to rest. And what Jesus is saying here is, even in the most important of things, like the mission that he entrusted into their hands, there's always a plan of rest, because the Sabbath is always a structure of grace within our world. Within our world. Even in this time of COVID, when you're home 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, even in this time of COVID, you have to plan in a time to come away for a while and rest for a while. And this is the line that I find the clincher. To rest for a while, for there were so many coming and going that the apostles had no time even to eat. Well, you could imagine the level of activity. that people were coming at them so constantly that the apostles didn't even have time to eat. Now we have to remember back in chapter 3 of Mark that the family of Jesus came to grab him because they thought he was going out of his mind because he didn't even have time to eat. Now this is passed on to the apostles who had gone out preaching and become so recognizable that people were stopping them everywhere that they went, asking them for this, that, and the other. And they themselves now in the same predicament as Jesus, that there's no time to eat. What I want you to hear is in this early mission, there is an energy and an exuberation that people are energized by what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what's happening in front of their eyes. There is an energy that is taking place where the people who are witnessing the apostles' ministry, they're responding to it in the same way that they responded to the ministry of Jesus himself. We don't often get that picture of the New Testament. Huh? We don't often get that picture. And it's not explored in great detail. But in our text today, it is explored. And what is being explored is the fact that the apostles themselves, these 12 that he had chosen, that they are doing something and entering into a time that is making the ministry of Jesus known to the rest of Israel. We don't know where they went, but what we do know is that wherever they went, there was an exuberation. Why? Because wherever they went, they couldn't even have time to stop and eat because of the people pressing on them on every side. So our text goes on, so they went up in a boat to a lonely place where they could be by themselves. You ever felt that way? Oh God. Just give me a little, all I want are 2 days, just give me 2 days where I could be by myself. But in their case, by themselves was the 12 and Jesus together. So the time of the lonely place is not a time for partying and fetting and zesting, and it's a time to be with him and to be in the solitude of the presence of Jesus. And this time to be by themselves. But people saw them going. And the people beat them to the arrival point. They guessed where they were going, ran hard, and reached to wherever it is Jesus was heading to, or ahead of them. And it says, so as he stepped out ashore, he saw a large crowd. And he took pity on them and began to teach them himself at some length. He took pity on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. They were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them at some length. The text that we have today is a very sensitive text. It's a text that speaks to the very heart of the mystery of the church. It's a text that explores something about church that we don't often hear, and that is not available in some of the newer churches. This nuance is not available in the interpretation of some of the newer churches. And the key line here is they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he set out to teach them at some length. They were like sheep without a shepherd. When we go to the Old Testament reading from Jeremiah, Jeremiah starts with a prophecy of doom on the shepherds who allowed the flock to be pastured and to be destroyed and scattered. What Jeremiah is speaking to there is that there were two deportations. There was a deportation, the one we are more familiar with, the Babylonian deportation, which is in the year 5-something. But before that, there was another deportation in the year 900 and something before Christ. And in this Assyrian deportation, Israel was split between the tribes of Judah and the tribes of Israel. And the tribes of Judah and the tribes of Israel, having been split, the tribes went, the ones that are now called the lost tribes of Israel, the 10 tribes, they went out into the world, into the nations, and they were assimilated out, and they were never gathered back in again into Israel. They were kind of lost and assimilated out into the other nations. And because they were assimilated into the peoples and into the foreign nations all about, because they were carted out, they were taken out, and they were left out there, never to return. In the second deportation after Babylon, they were allowed to return, because the good king Cyrus made the decree for their return, and Nebuchadnezzar and others, others made sure that this happened. The book of Ezra is about that return. But what we have here in the book of Jeremiah is a prophecy of the scattering of the tribes of Israel, but also a prophecy about how they will return. So Jeremiah says, "See my remnant flock, I myself will gather from all the countries where I have dispersed them. I will gather them myself." This is God speaking. That God will gather them himself from all the countries where they have been dispersed, and will bring them back to their pasture. And they shall be fruitful and increase in number. And this is the key verse. "I will raise up shepherds to look after them and to pasture them, with no fear or terror for them anymore. No one shall be lost." That God prophesies through Jeremiah that these scattered sheep throughout the world are going to be gathered back, and that he will raise up new shepherds, and these new shepherds will go after the lost sheep, and will gather the lost sheep from all the tribes and nations of the world. Are you hearing the prophecy? That the shepherds will go and gather the lost sheep from all the tribes and nations of the world. And then it says, "See, the days are coming," it is the Lord who speaks, "when I will raise up a virtuous branch for David." This is like Isaiah's prophecy of a shoot will shoot up from the stub of Jesse. The stub is a tree that you cut down, and there's nothing in it. And yet a little shoot shoots up. And out of that little shoot that shoots up, all the magnificence is going to happen. And it's saying the same thing from I will raise a virtuous branch from David, or for David. And whenever we see David, we're speaking about the Messiah who is being anticipated. And he will reign as a true king, and he will be wise. Now this is a prophecy of the Messiah, okay? This is a messianic prophecy, now hundreds of years before Jesus. He'll be a true king, he'll be wise, practicing honesty and integrity in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved, and Israel dwell in confidence. Remember these two designations, the tribes of Judah, the tribes of Israel. These are comprising the 12 tribes, the whole people. In his days, these two will come back together and will be constituted again as the 12 tribes. No longer will it be the 2 tribes who have remained and the 10 tribes that have been lost. The 12 will be reconstituted again. And Israel will dwell in confidence. And this is the name that he will be called, Lord our integrity. The text that we are speaking to today in our gospel is demonstrating the fulfillment of the text of Jeremiah. And that demonstration of the fulfillment is really where we have to see what Jesus is actually doing. It will become more apparent next week. And as we go forward, it'll become a little more apparent. But even now, we have to lay foundations for what is to come. You see, when Jesus says he sets about to teach them, he took pity on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. What Jeremiah is prophesying is that the Messiah will be a king, a prophet. He will be a ruler but he will be a shepherd. He will be a shepherd like David, but greater than David, because through him the whole prophecy will be revealed. What we're now working with here is Jesus taking the 12, and he's constituting Israel again. And he says that in Matthew's gospel, later down in Matthew's gospel, he says, and you will sit on 12 thrones, and you will rule over the house of Israel. Talking to the 12. And the 12, he's put them into motion. And they are now already ministering. In this text, they're being called apostles. And so he's constituting them. He's bringing them into the new ministry. And at the end of his gospel, he will send the 12 into the whole world to proclaim the good news to all creation. And whoever believes will be baptized. And by this sending out into the nations, sending the 12 into the nations, why is he now sending them into the nations? He's sending them to call the lost tribe of Israel back to God himself. Because as the nations are converted to God, all the remnants of the tribes, of the lost tribes of Israel, are being called back to God. And in their being called back to God, the prophecies of the Messiah from of old are being fulfilled. But having said that, I want you to look at this psalm that we have and look at it in a brand new way. Look at it in a brand new way. Because now we have to look at it not only as God taking care of his people as shepherd, but I want you to see it now as God fulfilling the prophecy that he has had from the time of Jeremiah, and Ezekiel also has this prophecy. The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall want. And this is the foundation and the principle of Christianity. If you really know who Jesus Christ is, how come you're living in such anxiety? How is it possible to living in anxiety if you know who Jesus Christ is? Because he is not just a man who died 2,000 years ago. He is God himself. And he is a God who shepherds his people and sets about in great distress and using much time to shepherd them. Move with compassion. And that word in the original language is moved in his bowels. Moved in his bowels. He set about to shepherd the people. And if you know that Jesus is your shepherd, how could you be in distress? How could we be anxious? How could we be worried? How could we be in a state of calamity? How could we be in a state where our whole life it seems like it is turning into turmoil? If we know that God is our shepherd, brothers and sisters, then our soul must be at rest, because it must rest in him. Fresh and green are the pastures where he gives us repose. Near restful waters he leads me, to revive my drooping spirit. And the fathers of the church have read into this psalm the full sacramental life of the church. Because by leading us to restful waters, the waters of baptism, he revives our drooping spirit, not just the weariness of the world that we have, but the drooping spirit that came from the sin of Adam and Eve, which we could not shake off, no matter how hard we tried, was washed away by these waters that he has led us to. And it says he leads us to restful waters. He is the one who leads us to baptism. He is the one who leads us to discipleship. He is the one who leads us to wash away our sin and become his child again and be incorporated into his body, into his family, that we are part and parcel of his family. And as part of his family, how could we ever be distressed or worried or afraid of anything at all? He guides me along the right path. He is true to his name. And this is the whole notion of vocation. You see, brothers and sisters, we are like errant sheep wanting to run and go our own way. We want to do what we want to do and go where we want to go. And that makes us more like goats and sheep, eh? Because, you know, them goat and them don't herd together. The sheep is kind of want to make us, that's why you separate the sheep from the goat. Because we want to do our own thing. We want to go our own way. And then when we get into trouble, we start to complain, God, where are you? Well, God is the one who is leading you all the time, and you refuse to hear his call. The whole understanding of vocation, brothers and sisters, is that he leads and guides us every single step of our way. Because this good shepherd, who reconstitutes the 12 tribes of Israel through his apostles, and the apostles hand it on to the bishops, and the bishops to the priests, gives counsel, guidance, and shepherding to the people of the whole world. If we would bend our heart to him, then he would shepherd us, and in which case he guides us along the right path, and he is true to his name. If I should walk in the valley of darkness, no evil would I fear. You are there with me, your crook and your staff. With these you give me comfort. You know, we make too much of evil. Far, far too much. You know, like Flip Wilson back in the day, the devil made me do it. No. We sometimes do it ourselves. We sometimes do it ourselves. Because if we are shepherded by the good shepherd, then there is nothing that evil can do against us. If we are bending our heart to the will of God, there is nothing that evil can do against us. If we are living our life as an answer to our vocation, then there's nothing that evil could do to undo us. He goes on again. You have prepared a banquet for me in the sight of my foes. Wow. And what a banquet God has provided. The banquet of his word and the banquet of the Eucharist. The banquet that is a banquet not just for here in this world, but a banquet that takes us to eternity. And to hear in this psalm, you have to hear the whole of the Mass, because you are feeding now at the banquet of the word. This banquet that he has prepared for you. But he also prepares a banquet of the Eucharist. And you better yearn for the day when we can come back together again and be in physical presence to receive him again. Flesh of his flesh, bone of his bone, and where we can partake again fully in the whole sacramental life and structure of the church that he has provided for us to shepherd us, his people. I want you to see how this psalm could never have been envisioned by David. But through Jesus Christ, the whole psalm comes anew. And not only prepares a banquet, my head you have anointed with oil. My cup runneth over. Because you see, when you came to the waters of baptism, not only were you washed with the waters, but you were anointed with sacred chrism, prophet, priest, and king. At confirmation, you are anointed again. The bishop is anointed in his head, the priest in his hands. Kings and prophets are anointed. This is how Jesus is shepherding his people. Sometimes we think, that the new evangelization is going out and doing something, and that is also true. But it is also a rediscovering of how Jesus is shepherding his people through the whole sacramental structure of the church that he has given to us as grace. Surely goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life. And in the Lord's own house I shall dwell forever and ever. And that final line is the hope of every Christian. Not just that I will live and here on earth see a peak of Jesus and of God and the divinity of God. But it is that when I die, I will see him as he really is. And that's the ultimate shepherding of a people. When he shepherds us, not just to live what our vocation here is on earth, to bend our heart to his will, but that we will be with him one day in heaven. And that's the hope of the Christian, that heaven and earth will come together on that day when we see him. In the same way that in the Eucharist, every time the Eucharist is celebrated, heaven and earth is united as the angels of God are ascending and descending. And as we say, Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, up in heaven, the whole heavenly court is bowing before the Lamb of God. in worship and in awe. Brothers and sisters, we have been living like vagrants and waifs in this world when we have been given a royal kingdom, a priestly kingdom, a people who have been set apart for God's own glory. And we are living as if somehow or the other we are vagrants and waifs and begging and scraping some kind of satisfaction in things that will bring us no satisfaction, when it is God himself who has given to us the incredible gift of his Son Jesus Christ and the ministry of the 12, who handed it on to the bishops of the world and to the priests of the world. The people of that day hungered for him. Do we hunger for him? Amen.